Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Logan, the drunken metalhead who muses, and tonight I am once again talking about classic metal albums from the aughts, the decade of 2010 to 2019. So this is a time period of music that is pretty special to me. This is when I got into metal music, and I feel like it's under-discussed, and specifically classic and future classic albums from this time period are not necessarily talked about too much in the metal community. And I think it's time to start talking about, what albums might be considered all-time classics or personal favorites in the years and decades to come. Because, it's now 4 years in the rear view from us. So why not start just having this fun conversation? And this is actually the second video of this type that I'm making. The first one I was focusing on more objective classics, like classic albums that the whole metal community kind of highlighted right when they were released. But with this video, I want to focus more on classics that hit a more of a personal level and are albums that I consider to be masterpieces. These are my 10 out of 10 albums from the 2010s. Let's dive in, and of course, I'm curious to hear about what your guys' 10 out of 10 albums are from this decade, so mention those as well in the comments. So first, for the usual housekeeping, to get the beer out of the way, I'm highlighting a brew from my favorite brewery, period. And this is a brewery in Asheville, North Carolina called Burial, and this is their Grace American Lager. And I love most of the brews that these guys do, but this one especially is perfect for me currently. It's a traditional light lager, but there's still so much flavor. It almost tastes like a honeysuckle, like a vibrant flower. And it's a sipper, but then at the same time, it's only 4.5%. So I'm gonna have a couple of these. Cheers. And then, what's in the background, marching along slowly and steadily throughout this video, it's going to be this album from Tin Horn Beast. This is Hunts and Wars. This is affectionately known as Battle Drone. So, it's like the kind of drone metal that you would hear right before a giant fight breaks out in like the Lord of the Rings or some shit. For me, it's good background music that doesn't take away from what I'm talking about, yet still captures my attention. So this is exactly what I would look for from a drone release. Definitely check out Tin Horned Beast. So to kind of further defend the albums I'm about to talk about, when looking back at like current established decades of metal music, it's easy to see that there are two lines of thinking. On one hand, the metal zeitgeist typically comes together to create a hall of revered albums and releases that are talked about as classics unanimously, typically. Who talks shit about, Leprosy by Death or Pleasure to Kill by Creator? On the other hand, there are albums that individual metal fans can hold, just as dearly, if not more importantly, than these classics because of personal reasons. And often there's also an overlap between these two. So with this video, I want to continue to have a conversation about classic albums from the aughts that at the same time are albums I personally find to be perfect. Because I think these overlap. So here they are, my personal masterpieces, if you will. And I think and hope they will be considered classics in the future. So this is more or less going to be in chronological order for me. Something about the years between 2014 to like 2017, 2018 are exceptionally formative for me. Which makes sense. That's when I was essentially 21 through 25. So big moments for me. Just getting out in life and experiencing, finding my own music even more so than before. So starting in 2014, this is my favorite album from that year. This is Foundations of Burden by Pallbearer. For those of you who do not know, Pallbearer are probably one of the bigger doom metal acts of the 2010s, releasing 4 like pretty big albums, 3 of which I really love. This, of course, is my favorite and the one I came in on. So this is their second album. Look at that inner gatefold right there. Foundations of Burden specifically finds Pallbearer exploring a more melodic yet emotionally charged side of their sound. Like, they kind of clean themselves up a little bit from Sorrow and Extinction, but then at the same time they don't lose any of the emotional heft and weight. And that's what really drives this album, is the emotional heft. That and a couple key tracks. Like, the pacing in this album is perfect and kind of unique. So it opens up with Worlds Apart, which one of my favorite Pallbearer songs, and one that really just breaks down the gate with some heavy riffage and kind of a faster start for a Pallbearer song. And then it goes into Foundations and the track Watcher in the Dark, which are both very overpowered by riffing. Kind of the climax, if you will, or like the pinnacle of the album, The Ghost I Used to Be, which is my favorite Pallbearer song. It's the first one I heard, and it just absolutely captures me every time I hear it. From the slower opening piece to the faster middle section with like the harsh yelled vocals, it's perfect. And then from there, it starts to just taper down through like the light interlude of Ashes and through the final diminishing tones of Vanished. It just is all very thematic and really captures kind of like a sad, grieving individual, and it's hard not to get emotionally attached to this album. And that's exactly what happened to me, because I mean, objectively when I look at this release, it's not like perfect. I mean, to me, Worlds Apart and The Ghost I Used to Be stand head and shoulders above the other tracks, but when all paired together, it works perfectly at giving you that melancholic feeling of loss and a little hope. I don't know. I think Pallbearer will definitely stand the test of time when people look back on this decade, and this is one of the releases why. And then jumping 1 year into the future, we've got MGLA or Migła or whatever. This is a Polish melodic black metal band, which, I mean, definitely takes cues from like Sacramentum and Dissection, but then at the same time, I really think they've formed their own sound, which is now being aped by other bands. I mean, just look at Uada and Spectral Wound, for example. Yeah, it's hyper melodic, hyper catchy, but then at the same time, the production and just the tone of it feels very diminished and depressive. And to me, this album introduced me to the whole idea of nihilism in life. And Of course, I was more, a teenager when I heard this, so I kind of latched onto it probably a bit heavier than I should have. But something about the whole idea of being nihilistic and lyrics like "the great truth is there isn't one" just really gripped me, and I absolutely just love this album. And the guitar riffing is some of the catchiest guitar riffing period, especially in black metal. And then also I have to highlight the drum work by Darkside. Holy shit, this drumming is next level. What he does on the ride and like the hi-hat cymbals cannot be recreated. It's it's impressive. But yeah, this band really made a name for themselves with the previous album, Hearts Towards None, but I think especially with this one. And I think this will be an album that will be heralded as a masterpiece. I will certainly call it that to anyone who wants to listen. And then we go another year into the future, into 2016, with another perfect 10 out of 10 album from a very different genre, which is actually one of my favorites. This is the collaborative effort between Cult of Luna and Julie Christmas called Mariner, and this is just crushing post-metal. But this is post-metal with a huge purpose behind it and kind of a different, broader scope. It's a concept album about space exploration, and it captures it perfectly. It's probably my all-time favorite album that has like space themes or, thematic elements of a long journey. But then also it's one of my favorite post-metal albums, period. Like, this stuff is insanely heavy on both a musical and emotional level. Like, these songs will just careen into you and crush you, but then also lift you up in some of the most epic ways. It like just pure adrenaline on so many of these tracks, along with crushing heaviness. A Greater Call is just beautiful. It's like the call to arms, if you will, for the album. Chevron is just track 2. Is just a sleek and kind of evil song where Julie really does a lot of cool experimentation with her vocals that is really only overshadowed by track 3, The Wreck of the SS Needle, where Julie Christmas really just lets out these insane harsh scream vocals, and she takes just center stage in that song, along with the mammoth Cult of Luna riffs. Approaching Transition is the more subdued track and maybe the weaker one on the album, but then at the same time it fits perfectly within the context of the release. And it finally is brought home with Cygnus, which is probably one of my favorite songs, period. Like, if I made a list of top 25 tracks, that would be on there. It builds perfectly. It takes everything the album has done up to this point and just multiplies it. And then at the very end, it's just pure chills. I don't even know how they wrote a track like that and created an album like this, but holy shit, they did it. Please, for the love of God, listen to Mariner. And then also releasing the same year, another extremely personal album, just like all of them. This is Kodama by Alcest. And this one is beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. It just makes me think of the element of air and, nature overall. Like, it takes the name of a tree spirit. So, but then at the same time, this tree spirit packs a bite. Like, I love how this album is kind of the return to Alcest's form after their previous release, Shelter, where there was no like black metal harsh vocals. Here, they're back, and they're vicious. And it really makes the clean singing elements a lot more haunting and beautiful to be, tied into the harsher vocal elements from Nej, the vocalist. I'm not going to try to say any of the tracks because, do not speak French. But track 1, Kodama, absolutely beautiful. And then, honestly, every single song off this release is absolutely essential. Another reason why I love this album is it ties in a love of anime that I have. That really, it happened at the same time that I discovered this album back in 2016. Was when I was kind of first diving into anime and first really understanding some anime that I had watched growing up as well, but went over my head, like Princess Mononoke, Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, stuff like that. But the anime this makes me think of the most is Berserk. If you haven't heard or read or watched Berserk, please check it out. It's the ultimate dark, evil spirit, Evil Dead manga, and it's a masterpiece. And this makes me think of it just because of how absolutely gorgeous it is, while at the same time how on the edge it also is. This is like a anime daydream wrapped up in an album, wrapped up in just beautiful nostalgia for me. And then the final release I want to talk about is kind of a crazy one. It's an 80-minute long song, and it takes its time developing, kind of moving at a snail's pace, and it's all a concept about loss and moving on and passing through from one phase to the next. And of course I'm talking about Bell Witch's Mirror Reaper. So this came out in 2017 and was originally being written with and then inspired by Bell Witch's drummer, who passed. So I'll put his name somewhere. But it's absolutely haunting. It features some of his vocals on here, and this is just a crazy album, and it kind of gives me chills just thinking about it. And look at that artwork. This is really what launched the career of artist Mariusz Lewandowski, which also rest in peace. But before this release, he was not really featured on any metal albums, and then all of a sudden, the dude was everywhere. So, but this album is extremely important to me, and it kind of highlights an interesting thing. We can have music that really just speaks to us at a deeply spiritual level, but then at the same time not listen to it that often. I probably listen to this album once or twice a year, but the thing is, I remember every single time I listen to it and have a specific memory attached to that listening experience. And it's just because of how emotive and immersive this album is. It's really like a world-building release. And I think it's because of how slow and chronological the album takes itself. It just builds up so naturally from the beginning ambience to forming a riff about 20 minutes in with the funeral doom vocals, and then an even more epic riff at the 30-minute mark, and then it reaches the ultimate apex of intensity kind of like at the halfway mark before starting to unpack itself and wrapping everything up with just some very spine-chilling, clean-singing elements towards the end. But every single time I've listened to this album, I really walk away with something special. I mean, it's because it's 80 minutes. I can't just put this fucking thing on when I'm going to work or on even the most average weekend. Like, I have to find time and specifically, intentionally be in the mood to hear Mirror Reaper. And that's part of why it's so special. It forces you to hit pause on everything and kind of get lost in what this album is. And just so you know, I take my Bell Witch seriously. Here's my favorite shirt. And that is right in my room. So there you go. 5 albums that not only mean the world to me, but also, I think, will mean a lot to the metal community as a whole. Truthfully, I feel like each of these albums have made a mark on their individual subgenres and will continue to be like influential to other bands and to other metal fans as they discover them. I really do think a decade or 2 decades from now, people will talk about these albums in hushed tones and with reverence as, the albums that we talk about from like the 90s. Once again, these are just my personal favorites from this decade. I want to hear about albums that you think are 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 classics from the 2010s, and ones that you think the metal community as a whole will just praise and continue to carry on as classics in the future. But seriously, this is one of my favorite topics to kind of dive into. So I want to give you a cheers and thanks for watching.